Continuing on Take Command with the much-awaited Logan Paulson Senior Bowl debrief.
Right.
Little, small coaching news items got in the way of what people really want, which is draft nuggets, Logan. You now have a week to reflect on the week that you had down in Mobile. Where did your eyes wind up going for much of that week, both in general and kind of maybe some positions that you were biased to look at because they're gigantic needs for Washington?
Yeah. So first off, if you want to hear my thoughts on every single day that I was down there, we did a podcast with the Command Center crew every day. And that's kind of my immediate reaction. And so now you're getting a much more mature, much older, much wiser Logan Paulson who's reviewed the film. So this is that.
That's Take Command, baby. We're notoriously mature and wise.
That's this podcast. But if you want the daily updates on some players, just hear some different names, go check that out on the Commanders Instagram, Commanders Podcast Network. So first off, high level thoughts is, you go into the Senior Bowl with some preconceived notions, specifically positions of strength, positions of weakness. And so I thought there weren't going to be that many edge rushers down there, right? Guys that would have have dynamic kind of pass rushing assets. And I came out of there going with those second round picks, those high second round picks, there's going to be some ball players there. I thought the offensive line had kind of a unique situation in the sense that they had a bunch of guys who are going to measure and look the part very well, but are a little bit green. But the talent, the athletic ability of those guys is very, very high end. I came in also thinking I was a little bit mixed on the receivers because none of the top flight guys are going to be there. There's those 7 or 8 top flight receivers. None of them were going to be there.
Neighbors, Harrison, et cetera.
Right. And the 2 guys from Texas weren't coming. The 2 guys, the other guy from LSU, Brian Thomas Jr., wasn't going to be there. And I was kind of well, who's going to be there? And the name was kind of Xavier Legette. And then you realize, man, there are some outstanding receivers here. Defensive back, there's a couple names that stick out to you, but none of them really kind of separated themselves. I think there was probably 5 guys that were pretty good, but I think the talent at receiver was kind of the story of the day. The kind of unexpected talent on the defensive line and just kind of the athletic freaks on the offensive line were guys I was just holy cow. And then the other one I think that I was a little surprised by was the running backs. And the reason I was surprised by the running backs is because there's 10 running backs there. There's 5 on a team, and just the ability for all of them to catch the football at a high level. I thought, for the last couple of years, this team's been looking for a true scat back, third down back. And I'm man, there's a bunch of those guys in this year's draft that get you excited, who have a lot of juice or explosive playmakers and can catch the football like receivers. So in terms of needs for Washington, I kind of came out even though this isn't the top end running back, there's no Saquon, there's no elite player, there's no Jahmyr Gibbs. There are some guys that definitely fill needs for you from a talent standpoint.
Yeah, I do wonder. I feel like that scat back is kind of something Washington needs. They've got B-Rob, they've got Rodriguez as kind of B-Rob insurance, but that pass catching versatile player, especially if Kliff is going to spread it out and have a 11 or a 10, 5 wide, 10 personnel type of thing, and yeah, that could be interesting to see if that guy can split out and you get some of those formations maybe out of 11 or maybe out of some different personnel groupings, but similar formationally. As far as the lines go, we know that is a huge emphasis for Dan and for Adam, is getting the offensive line and the rest of the defensive line outside of that middle with Allen and Payne, which is already set, assuming that those 2 guys are in place. Where do you lie a little bit deeper, maybe some names on the edge class? Can they get a starter? Because they're not going to, I would doubt they take 1 at 2. I guess if they trade down, maybe they get, all of a sudden they're sitting at 7 or 13. They trade with Atlanta or Vegas or somewhere in that realm. They could take an edge player in the first round.
Yeah.
But presuming that the first edge guy comes for them at 34 or whatever that Bears pick is, 46, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not that late, but anyway, 39, whatever.
I think it's 40, it's 40 or something, 438 maybe, something like that. Whatever it is,
yeah, whatever. The Bears pick. What are some names to watch? And did any of the guys at the Senior Bowl, are those the names that we're watching?
Yeah, obviously Latu's there, and he's probably the most dynamic edge rusher, but he's going to be a top 20 pick. he's going to have some medical issues. He's not going to test really well, but his film is amazing. Like, he's an amazing football player. And so he's kind of in that same category as like Jared Verse, the defensive end from Florida State, or Dallas Turner from Alabama. Like, those guys are kind of the top 3 dudes. Those are going to be first round players. And I guess one of them could slip out, but they're not slipping out of the top 25. So a guy that I was high on going in was a guy named Darius Robinson from Missouri. He's 6'5", he's 295. And if you've consumed any Senior Bowl content since the Senior Bowl, you know about this guy. If you haven't, you probably haven't heard of him. He is an absolute monster. He plays defensive end. I think he could play stand up in a 3-4. He's got heavy hands. He's got violent striking capability. He can rush from the inside as a 3 technique. He can rush the perimeter. He's strong. He's aggressive. He's competitive. And like, when I was listening to the press conference, obviously I just come back from the Senior Bowl, and I was like, Darius Robinson is the guy. Like, he is the guy. And a lot of people had 4th round grades on him going into this process. I think he might be a first round player now. But again, if he slips out of the first round and you're sitting there at 35 and he's there, I think the way Dan plays this defense, I think with the needs on this defense, I think you sprint that pick in. I don't think you even think twice about it. I think he's a tremendous football player, and he's kind of built and wired the way that Dan wants these guys to be wired. Another guy is Braswell from Alabama. Again, a little bit stiff, got some power qualities as an edge rusher, 6'4". I think he's 256. Very, very physical, a little bit limited in terms of kind of pass rush moves, but a solid guy, played at Alabama, good football player, again, flashed that power trait. Adisa Isaac from Penn State is another guy that I thought had a really good week, and everyone kind of talks about Chop Robinson. Again, Chop Robinson's a guy that, depending on the interview process, depending on how you like him, might slip there to that top end of the second round. Chop is a guy that is not very technical, but he's going to probably run a 4.4 and probably jump 42 inches. Like, he is a freak. So if he were to slide just because of preference, maybe that's a guy that catches your eye. But Adisa Isaac is the guy that plays opposite him. He's got some real ability, real juice. Talisi Fuaga is probably the best offensive lineman there from Oregon State, 6'6", 335, 340. And he hit him with a bull rush and hit him with some speed. And you're like, that's an NFL offensive tackle. That's an NFL winning pass rush. So I like that. And I think those guys were probably the guys that stuck out the most. Austin Booker from Kansas is another guy that is very, very technically raw. 6'6", 245, not quite developed there physically, but showed some juice, and probably like a third, fourth round guy that, again, could fill a need for the Commanders. So I came out of this process actually thinking, man, there are some pieces here that could potentially fill needs depending on the type of system they want to run, but some good competitive physical football players at the top of the second round. And then there's other guys that I think could kind of, maybe that 3rd, 4th round range. You're like, okay, we get a good football player here that fills a need for us.
So it's so interesting hearing you talk about some of these guys that are raw and have potential, and feeling optimistic about that.
Yeah.
And that's the Dan Quinn effect.
Yeah.
Like, you think about what he did with Micah and taking a guy that was seen as a middle linebacker and turning him into arguably the best pass rusher in the NFL. Stretch is inarguably the best pass rusher in the NFL over the last couple of years. And you think like Chop Robinson with that speed, and you're like, well, that was what Parsons was.
Yeah.
A guy who can just run people down, explosive. Can you teach him how to turn some of that speed into power? He's obviously already very powerful in his own right, but that kind of prospect, or a Darius Robinson, like you mentioned, he said he can rush from all these different spots. And I'm like, well, that's the Micah Parsons piece.
Right.
Like, and not that Dan needs Micah Parsons to coach. He didn't have that piece that he moved around as kind of the queen on the chessboard, if you will, in Seattle, and he did just fine. But if he has that and can replicate that in some meaningful way, like, that would be obviously very, very beneficial. And the confidence level to do that, compared to kind of the confidence level we've had the last couple of years with a piece like that, where you're like, no, you need the perfect piece, I think is really exciting. And it shows you how much the coaching matters. And I'd also ask this, is there anybody, like one or two guys, that really sticks out from what Dan is looking for? And he would define that as, physical, explosive, and strains like hell. That is kind of what they're looking for. That's the type of player that they want. They want a player who, you see them, they're straining, they're working hard, but they're powerful and explosive. And like, that's a Commanders player. Is there one or two of those guys among that list that really stands out?
Yeah, I mean, Darius Robinson. He was voted the practice player of the week for a reason. Like, he just finished the football. He was violent. He was aggressive with it. I mean, like, he could not have had a better week of practice, like, and I like his film a lot, and I had a second round grade on him, but dude, he was an animal. Another guy is Brandon Fiske. I'm sorry, that's how you say him, from Florida State. He's a defensive tackle, but in terms of like the Commanders' new player, dude had a motor that would not stop. Defensive tackle, 6'4", 295 pounds, but man, his motor was fantastic. He'd get blocked, he'd get pushed down, he'd snap up. Like, there was just absolutely no stop to his game. And I know he's got shorter arms, or like 32 or 31 inches, which is for a defensive tackle pretty short. But there were plays where I could not take my eyes off of that guy, just because there was a relentlessness to him that you're just like, oh my God, like, I want that guy. I want those two football players, because I can tell they love it. I can tell they're passionate about it. And it was fantastic. So I think those guys are guys that stick out to me. I'm just kind of looking over my notes here real quick. Another guy is Martian Keelan. Like, he was awesome. He's from Western Michigan, edge, kind of like, I think he weighed 6'3", 270-ish pounds, but played with good power, played with great bend, that same kind of relentlessness. And I love seeing that. So again, there's like 5 or 6 guys right there. I know I mentioned a defensive tackle, but Keelan is an edge, and he'll go in the second round. And I think like those are 4 dudes right there that I think are value edge. Obviously, I prefer Keelan over the other 2 guys, Isaac and Braswell, because I think he's just a better football player, and I prefer Darius Robinson over all of them. But like, all of those guys are good players. All of them play hard. All of them are super competitive. So I love what that brings. And coming into the opportunity, you're kind of like, man, this is a weak edge class. There's nobody there. But those are 4 dudes. You're like, man, we're a better football team if they're on the roster. So
I'm excited to see everybody's mock draft screenshots now include Darius Robinson at 34 for Washington.
I hope so.
And I would say that we probably are due maybe next week for mock draft 1.0 for us.
Yep.
Maybe we'll, I think we should do 2 rounds, AKA we get 3 picks instead of just, all right, we did the Commanders pick at 2, and that's our mock draft. It was a little more fun when it was in the middle, or a little more podcast friendly when you were in the middle of it last year. So let's apply some of those same questions to the offensive line real quick, and then we will get to the week of the quarterbacks, and especially Bo Nix, who seemed to really shine down there. But offensive line-wise, if the Commanders want to be able to come out of this draft, and especially the first really 3 rounds with at least 1 starting offensive lineman, what kind of candidates are we looking at?
Yeah, so I think it depends on whether you're looking internal or, tackle, like guard or tackle here, in terms of what kind of player. Obviously, Talisi Fuaga is like the big name. Some people have him as the number 2 tackle on their board. Absolute monster out of Oregon State. I want to say I was a little disappointed with his performance. Again, nothing crazy. His film's excellent, but a guy that is still going to go probably top 15. It's just he could have gone top 10. I think now I see maybe a little bit of guard to his game that I didn't see there before, like kind of like Brandon Sheriff type player. Then there's the Tyler Guyton. You're going to hear that name a lot over the next couple of weeks. He's the guy from Oklahoma, 6'7". I think he's 320, big old hoss, long arms, former tight end, played running back in high school, an absolute beast. But because of that athletic potential, he's probably going to be a first round guy. I think he's worked his way in that. Josh Morgan from Arizona, another guy that I think people are going to hear a lot about. He's interesting because I think people thought he was a tackle. I think he's going to play guard now. I think he's going to be a good football player, but could be a guard, could slide into the second round, maybe at that 35 spot. Still feels like a first round player to me. Kind of like the gentleman that Dallas drafted in the first round last year from
Tyler Smith.
Tyler Smith, yeah. Kind of feels like that a little bit. A little technically raw, good play strength, really good athlete, but going to be a good guard at the next level. If he does slide in there, I think you feel really good about it. So the problem is I think all these guys that played well are going to bump into the first round, Powers Johnson from Oregon, the center there, I think people were kind of floating him in the second round range. Big old dude, 6'3", I think he's 340, moves like an absolute maniac, but he is going to probably be a first round player now as well. So that kind of leaves you with a bunch of guys that, I think maybe aren't necessarily household names. And first one is Patrick Paul, and he's Chris Paul's brother. So kind of a funny story there, from Houston. He's 6'7". I think he weighed in at 335. He had 36-inch arms. So absolutely the prototype for the position. Like, he is like what you're looking for an offensive tackle. The problem is very technically raw. Like, he went to Houston. Not sure how good the O-line coaching was there. He was so much bigger and stronger than everybody. So he kind of got away with some stuff that that you wouldn't normally be able to get away with. So I think he's an interesting guy because I think he's definitely got it from a physical standpoint. He's got it from a mentality standpoint. Got to dial in the technique a little bit. Like his first rep in one-on-ones was against Braswell, and Braswell kind of walked him back into the quarterback. And like I said, Braswell from Alabama, it's not a huge man, but tightening the hands up, working the anchor, working the base. Another guy that I thought had a great week that nobody was talking about was Christian Jones from Texas. And everyone kind of had him as a later kind of, I want to say like 5th round, 4th round type of guy. But he's played a lot of football. He's a 6-year guy from Texas. He's 6'4", I think he's 6'5", he's 320. Excellent technique, 34-inch arms. And the first day of one-on-ones, didn't lose a rep, was absolutely dominant. Slowed down a little bit after that, but a guy that is very experienced, I think has some guard flexibility. And so does he play himself into the top end of the second round? Probably not, but is he a good football player that if you needed to take a swing on somebody, I think that'd be a great fit. And then the guard from UConn. UConn is a very interesting guy. Small school guy, small school guy, excuse me. I don't want to besmirch UConn there. But Christian Haynes.
As long as you're not doing it for basketball, they don't care.
Yeah, right. And he was an absolute maniac. Like he was finishing guys. You could hear. I sit in like the top section of the bleachers, so I sit way up high so I can watch the offensive line, the receivers, the running backs, kind of everybody at once. And I could hear him yelling, like talking smack, like this weak ass, like, and just going nuts and playing, like living up to that billing. So a guy that I think a lot of people had in the 5th round, again, probably plays his way into the second, just showing he can deal with kind of the higher level of competition. So there are some guys there. Again, he's probably the most complete player in that conversation we're just talking about, the kid from UConn, Christian Haynes. But like Patrick Paul, really interesting from a size, weight, measurable standpoint. Christian Jones from an experience technicality standpoint, very, very interesting. And I don't think they were in that conversation at the top of the second before this week, but I think now they probably are. So.
Yeah, I am. I'm very curious to see what Washington does. Obviously, with those first 40 or those first 3 picks in the top 40-ish, but then they do have a bunch of other ones, 6 in the top 102. So some of these guys that may be coming out of Senior Bowl look like they're seconds. They were 5ths going in. Do they actually wind up settling into the 3rd and becoming available for Washington? Could be interesting.
Yeah, another guy I just looking at my notes, I left his name off, was Kingsley Suamataia from BYU. Again, a guy that's got like that tackle frame, very raw, kind of similar to Patrick Paul, but I think had a better week of practice, honestly. So there are very talented kind of prototypical body types there for you that, again, get you really excited, And I know we had Nagy on. He was like, this is kind of a weak draft, but I think the top 120 is pretty damn good, and I think that they're like going down. This is the best Senior Bowl I've been to. This is the best Senior Bowl I've watched in a while. And I think it's just talent rich. It's talent rich at specific spots, offensive line. I think offensive tackle specifically. There are some guard players, obviously. We mentioned the kind of the bump at edge rusher that I saw here, the running back talent, and the receivers are very, very talented. But I do think there are some opportunities to get some people that, get some good stuff going for them. So.
Yeah, we'll see if the contour of the draft influences obviously what Washington does as well. Do they trade up, try to get back into the second round, and kind of as we finish out the evaluations over the next couple of months, how valuable are those 4th through 7th round picks? So there's so much here, which is why we'll continue to talk about it.